Hi there everybody, Steve the Amateur Historian. How y'all doing? What follows is a brief piece for a Historic Murders of Portland episode I recorded that I couldn't find for a while, and I thought I'd lost it. I thought like I'd accidentally deleted it. I'm constantly downloading and flushing out footage to have space, and I thought I lost it. But what I figured out was, I use my primary iPhone, or the actual iPhone that I use to like talk to people and stuff now. I use that more often to shoot video, but if I'm out shooting a lot of stuff and I need some extra space, I still use my now like 6.5-year-old iPhone 5, which I used to use all the time for video, and I just forgot that I'd recorded it on there, so I went back to use that phone recently and discovered there was some old footage on there, and was like, oh, so I do still have this. So anyway, what follows is an on-scene, brief Historic Murders of Portland episode that I'm going to bring to you now, and then when that's done, we'll be coming back here to me for some final thoughts on the matter, so enjoy. Greetings, everybody, from downtown Portland. Whoop, whoop. I'm on 5th and Oak, I think. I only need to get a block over. I'm going to be right across the street from all of the food cart hullabaloo here. But I want to get to the, it'd be the northwest corner of 5th and Harvey Milk for a fresh new episode of Historic Murders of Portland. So I'm gonna head this direction. Now, I initially thought that today's location was more near 4th and Yamhill. That was based on one article I read that gave an address for the location. I then, at random, found that the location, according to a local historian whose name I won't say, because I don't want to give him credit, but because I'm probably going to botch his last name, as I often do. He said that the location, not where this event happened specifically, but where it would have happened, because it was the house run by a woman named Minnie Reynolds, was actually located here. He said, I remember it said, like, it's located where the Oregon Trail building is. And I immediately, fortunately getting to know the building names as well as I have, I immediately knew what I was looking for. So yeah, this is the northwest corner of Harvey Milk, which is the crossing street, even though the sign still says Stark. And then this is 5th, and this is where all the food carts are, so I'm gonna have to be enduring delicious smells that are gonna make me extremely hungry while trying to do hello bus while I'm trying to do part of today's video. It is downtown. I don't know why I expected to be quiet. So it's about 3:30 a.m. September 1st, 1887. It's a long, long time ago. And the house run by Minnie Reynolds is again roughly where this building is now. And a doctor is called to this house run by Minnie Reynolds because a woman there who went by the name of Frankie Moore, but I think that was more her name on the streets. According to a newspaper, her real name was Anna Wright. I'm not sure if that's absolutely correct, but that is what the newspaper said, that Frankie Moore was more of a nickname or a name she used on the streets. And a doctor was called to the site here because I'll just call her Frankie Moore just because I'm not 100% certain that was the name I more frequently saw in publications. She had been discovered injected with a potentially fatal dose of morphine, which morphine was kind of the drug of the olden days. Now, when you think of morphine, you more think of having to take it after a serious injury, having to go see the doctor. Now, that certainly doesn't mean it's not addictive. I mean, I would read so many stories about people who became, as they were reported in the newspapers, morphine fiends. However, despite the fact that Frankie Moore was discovered in that state in one of these rooms, it wasn't thought that she did this herself. I know that there was some brief mention, oh, do you think you did this herself? In fact, the doctor that reported to her asked her that question, like, did you do this to try to end her life? And she was like, yes. But the doctor himself said, like, she was so incoherent, I don't even think she knew what I was asking her. So there wasn't really a whole lot of stock put into what she was saying at that point. But nobody really believed that she had done this herself, because shortly before she was discovered, a man who, unfortunately, especially way back in the day, like so many other instances, a man who lingers as unidentified. He didn't give his specific name when he showed up, but he came and visited the house that Minnie Reynolds ran. And by the way, when I say house, I mean, like, you know, a place where men went to be with women. I think you can connect the dots on that. There was a mysterious man who looked kind of run down, kind of a ruffian, and it was thought that he went into the room where Frankie Moore was found and had forcibly injected morphine into her. Why he would have done that, if he was just some sadist, if she maybe actually did do morphine sometimes, and this guy was maybe a connection of hers, that can't be said, because nobody else was in there except for her and this mysterious guy, and he was never identified. Nobody knows who he is or where he went, and she ended up dead. So nobody really knows the full circumstances of what happened in that room. All we know is a strange, mysterious guy who everyone thought was probably a morphine user and a morphine dealer, had been here, taken off, and then a short while later, Frankie Moore is found at the house here, barely clinging to life. And one of the biggest issues in all this was, first off, the other girls that Minnie Reynolds kept at her place, they spoke to authorities, but they were kind of tight-lipped about things, primarily because of the kind of business that they were running out of this place. They, they didn't want, I think in particular they didn't want current clients and potential future clients to think that if some little episode happened, that the girls there would rat you out and say you spent time there, because a lot of the guys that came to places like this were doing it in secret. They didn't want their family to know. They didn't want their wives to find out. So they were pretty tight-lipped about the goings-ons at this place. But they were, I guess you could say, courteous enough to say that the guy that they saw leave, who again, they said they didn't know, but again, they may have stayed quiet about that. They said that this guy was someone that they personally recognized as a local kind of, I don't know what you'd call him, a morphine character. This was a guy who did use morphine, and they even considered him kind of a junkie and a dealer. And it was mentioned even in one of the articles I read that, hey, people that, had morphine, dealt morphine, things like that, they often carried their own syringes with them. So that could explain how he would have been so easily able to inject Frankie Moore at the place here. And a doctor's quickly called to the scene. They try to be discreet about it. And the doctor actually manages to keep Frankie Moore alive for several more hours, but doesn't really get any information out of her before she ultimately expired. So this is was one of those cases where it was kind of in the papers and then it was gone. I only found like 2 or 3 articles about it. And one of the articles was from about a month down the road, near the end of September, pretty much just somebody saying, hey, we don't know who killed her yet. And under the circumstances of how it happened, we probably will never know, because I don't think anybody really cared that much. And, that was, the tragedy of cases like this. Because of who Frankie Moore was, the circumstances she was thought to be existing under, there probably wasn't a whole lot of incentive to be concerned about solving her crime with all these other crimes going on out there. And it may have not even been a murder, but it seems like whoever did this, if this was somebody that knew their way with morphine, it seems to me that they would know they would at least have a general idea how much they were giving her, how much might be too much. And, you know, these are old newspaper articles. In some respects, they give you a lot of good information, but in other respects, they don't. Sometimes just because they don't know enough about it. And I'm talking specifically about certain drug amounts that one person might take in. We don't know how much had been injected into Frankie Moore, but for what little the other girls around the place were willing to say in terms of identifying this guy, they did say he was kind of a shady character. And the moment they, you know, found her and realized who it was that just left, they were all pretty convinced that this was intentional. So at the very least, manslaughter. And even though my show is called Historic Murders of Portland, I do cover some cases that may be more situation of manslaughter. They're pretty much altogether stories about people who were killed by somebody else. If I tried to call it historic murders, manslaughters, accidental maimings, ... of Portland, that title would get a little chaotic. Probably throw things askew. So we don't know for absolute certain if this guy tried to specifically inject enough into Frankie Moore so she would die. But there's incentive to think that, and beyond that, this is not good press, because less than 2 years earlier, Emma Merlotin, in one of the most infamous unsolved murder cases in the history of Portland, in November 1885, she is killed a ways south from where Minnie Reynolds' place was, where Frankie Moore died. And that shed a much more negative light on what was going on in that area. And there's been a lot of theorization. Obviously, we can't know for certain, but there's a lot of theorization that the motive behind Emma Merlotin's murder was, and she was a high-priced prostitute. She probably spent time with some very influential people. So it's thought that, someone maybe didn't want it getting out that he was seeing her, and so they kill her off. I know the term is dead men tell no tales, but if you're adding Emma Merlotin into the mix, I guess it's just dead people tell no tales. Dead prostitutes tell no tales. And so it was not completely unheard of that sometimes someone would intentionally kill a working girl just to keep them quiet, just because they were afraid that it might get out that they were hanging out with women like this. And again, what if your family finds out? What if your wife finds out? What if the place you work at, what if they find out? You lose your job and your family and everything goes south. Now, if this guy was a little more than just a morphine fiend, then, maybe he didn't really have a whole lot to lose in the first place. We can't say because we don't know who he was. But yeah, there's still a lot of questions left in the air. And, by 1887, there was much more negative attention put on prostitution than there might have been 2-3 years earlier. So this was a case that pretty much popped up, probably mostly because, it's a murder story, and that always gets people's attention. And then, it fades away after a day or two. It doesn't stay in the press like when a rich person gets killed or a family, something that's going to more get people's attention back during that time. It just kind of fades away. And that's unfortunate, because if this guy was just a common criminal, how easy might it have been to apprehend him? And it is a mixed bag that, one of your own girls that works out of that house with you potentially gets murdered by some sketchy morphine nut, and you still decide to not really convey all that you may know. I'm willing to bet there's at least 1 or 2 girls working out of that house that probably knew who this guy was, considering they all said they kind of recognized him as a local dope fiend. So even though this guy may very well have killed one of their girls, they kept at least quiet enough about it to keep this guy from ever being identified. So I'm really glad that I chose to cover this story, because it gets at the heart of something that I don't feel like is something I would end up covering that much in this series in particular for that time when this happened, because this is a long time. This is the 1880s, and there's not a lot of information about murder cases from way back when. During that time, there's there'll be like one sentence in a newspaper, like so-and-so was charged with the murder of this guy, and then I can't find any other information on it. But most of the cases I did cover or have covered during this time, a lot of times they're, usually male-related crimes. Either, two guys getting drunk in a saloon and killing each other. One guy owes another guy money and the other guy takes him out for it. Sometimes, guys killing their wives for whatever reason, or, a guy whose wife leaves him, he can't handle it, and either out of the rage of that, or, God forbid, his wife finds a new man, he hauls off and kills her. Those make up most of the cases I've covered, but this one gets at the heart of something else, which was all of the, I guess you could call them homes, that used to be scattered in what is now today downtown Portland. And there were, madams running a lot of them, and there was a lot of girls working out of these houses. And when you go back to all this old newspaper information, you don't find a lot of information about these, all these girls that were going through these places, unless there's a reason to discuss them, such as the 1882 murder of a guy by the last name of Brown. And this was in the fairly prominent home that was run by a woman named Carrie Bradley. And that drew attention to her home, some of the girls that worked out of there. But this is one of those little tiny stories. I only found a couple articles referencing it. It's one of those stories that was kind of there for just a moment, and then it slipped through the cracks that showed, not just, because obviously that hasn't changed now. If you go into the field of sex work, there's always the potential that some guy that wants to procure your services might just be doing so because he's a crazed lunatic who might want to cause you harm. But beyond that, it gets at the heart of what was a major, that was kind of the drug, if you could say, epidemic of the time. Now, if you talk about Portland and drugs, it's mostly like heroin and meth, and sure, there's, other drugs. But those are the ones that I hear about the most, and are the ones that, when people try to sneak into the place where I work because they want to just use the restroom real quick, those are usually the drugs they end up doing. But back during this time, morphine was really the main drug of choice for people. And like, drugs such as heroin and meth, they would use a needle. So it's another story that gets at the heart of that. And I know I covered, there's like one other story I think I've covered in this series that dealt with the effects that taking morphine could have on people. There was a guy that it was believed got jacked up on morphine and then went and killed his boss out of some kind of drugged up jealous revenge. And the drugs were blamed for it. And back in the day, whenever drugs were involved, the authorities would almost spend more time trying to find who the drug connections were in town and bust them than actually focusing on the murder case itself. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's what happened in this case. Certain instances such as Carrie Bradley, also the 1885 murder of Emma Merlotton, things like that, as well as many other things, kind of started swaying what was kind of general popular opinion about all of the women that were working the streets back then. And while there were certainly articles and pieces that discussed this particular case and expressed sympathy for the victim, there was definitely a lot of focus on, like, well, this is what happens when you let these drug fiends walk around wild. The drug fiends are the real problem. And obviously, if this case went down the way it's been described, that this guy, forced this woman to take his drugs, then yes, in that instance, that is 100% what is to blame on the matter. And you absolutely should go after the source. If If drugs are driving people to kill, then those drugs need to be restricted. I believe the same thing about, certain types of guns, and certain people should not be allowed to have guns due to their past records or their mental state or anything that might create the likelihood that they may engage in some unwarranted and unprovoked violent crime with them. And, while we're spitballing, could it be that there was something that this guy liked to do when he was with women that he was ashamed for or embarrassed by, or something he knew wouldn't be deemed very cool? Maybe the women working the streets might talk and shut him down, and so he did this to, keep this woman quiet. I don't know. That's just a thought. I feel like if that was the case, he probably would have been doing that to more women. Maybe he was giving morphine to other women, just this is a rare instance where the woman actually died. But, it is a tragedy that the victim in this case was, despite some of the sensitivity being shown and some of the information I found on it, the fact of the matter is, because of who this woman was, where she worked, the rapidly declining opinion of sex workers and these houses that these madames ran, the decreasing, I don't know what word you'd use, appreciation for the world's oldest profession. This is still an instance where a woman had her life taken, whether by accident or by murder. And the people around town, for the most part, were still very quick to forget about it, even quicker than most just random murder cases. And in terms of Minnie Reynolds, who was running the house where this happened, there's little bits and pieces of information about her back in the, old documentation, old newspapers and things like that, but not really a whole lot. There's some references in newspapers of times where she had to go to court. Probably, in relation to a lot of stuff that was going on in her home, there would always be. It seemed like pretty much if there was any kind of vice going on, whether it was a house of prostitution or, a saloon that wasn't following proper regulations, they would get just slap on the wrist after slap on the wrist, and usually not get into a whole lot of trouble so their businesses could continue. So that was most of what I found about Minnie Reynolds. And of course, a lot of these, there was multiple women, and a lot of them kind of worked between like 3rd, 4th, 5th avenues, kind of right in the middle of what is downtown Portland today. And, for the most part, again, especially as popular opinion kind of began to fade, and there started to become more resistance against this, and more people wanted sex workers, and they wanted that out of the city. So, as the 1800s continue to wear on and get closer to ending and transitioning into the 1900s, so too a lot of these madames and women who ran these homes, they also began to gradually fade away over time with that. It happened behind closed doors. So there's a lot of stuff we don't know, and a lot, either the guy killed her or it was an accident. It's one or the other. And that's all I really have to say on the matter of the murder of Anna Wright, or Frankie Moore, as she was also known, who was killed back in 1887. And I appreciate you all stopping by, as always. I know this is a little bit kind of janky of a Historic Murders of Portland episode, but up until a couple days ago, I thought I'd lost this video, so I was happy to be able to stumble back onto it again. So, still wanted to put it together here, still wanted to bring this story to you guys, and reflect a little bit on the matter and the time, the circumstances of it all. I remember trying to walk through downtown, and there was just a lot of noises and a lot of people scattering around. And of course, downtown Portland's a little suspicious in certain areas, kind of since COVID came around a while back. And so
it was a little difficult to kind of stay in that area and try to film it all in that area, so I did the best I could under the circumstances. So, appreciate you all stopping by. Thank you so much. Remember, as always, like, share, subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, if you like my channel as a whole, you like what I'm doing, it helps me grow. There's also a Patreon that I have up and running. The link to that is in the description with this video. If you want to help me out that way, thank you in advance. In addition to that link, there's the link to my Facebook, my Instagram, my Reddit subreddit, and my TikTok as well. So all that said, thank you so much for stopping by. And until next time, this has been Steve, the Amateur Historian.